The groan of the tow truck's hydraulics was a vulgar sound in the pristine quiet of the corporate campus. Elias Vance watched as the winch cable tightened, lifting the front wheels of his old Ford off the asphalt. It was a machine from another era. Its blue paint faded to the color of a tired sky, its fenders scarred with the honorable wounds of a life spent working. It looked profoundly out of place here, amidst the gleaming glass towers of Croft Innovations and the silent, electric luxury cars parked in their designated slots. He felt a presence beside him and turned. A woman stood there, her posture a study in rigid control. She was dressed in a gray suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin, a layer of armor. Her name was Helena Croft, and she ran this empire. He knew that not from a name tag, but from the way the air itself seemed to bend to her will. "Is this yours?" she asked. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the absolute expectation of being heard. It was a voice that did not make requests. Elias nodded slowly, his hands in the pockets of his worn canvas jacket. He did not offer an explanation. He had been told to park here by the subcontractor who hired him for the custom shelving in the West Wing library. He had the temporary permit on his dashboard, but he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that it would make no difference. Helena Croft's gaze swept over him, from his steel-toed boots, dusty with sawdust, to the lines of fatigue around his eyes. It was a swift, efficient appraisal, the kind one gives to a piece of faulty equipment before ordering its removal. There was no curiosity in it, no malice, only a detached assessment of an anomaly that needed to be corrected. "This is a private executive lot," she stated, the words clipped and final. "You will have to retrieve it from the impound yard. Security will give you the address." She turned to leave, the matter already dismissed from her mind, a checklist item now completed. Elias said nothing. He simply watched his truck, the repository of his tools and his livelihood, being hoisted into the air. He felt the familiar, cold weight of resignation settle over him. It was a feeling he had cultivated for years, a shield against the casual cruelties of a world he no longer wished to engage with. He could fight it, could show his permit, could argue with the security guards who now flanked her. But he knew the architecture of power. To argue was to have already lost. He thought only of Maya. He would have to call a car service. He would be late to pick her up from school. Her face, small and serious, flashed in his mind. That was the only thing that mattered. The truck, the job, the quiet humiliation, it was all just noise. He turned his back on the CEO and her glass kingdom and began the long walk to the main gate. He did not see her pause, ever so slightly, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes as she watched him go. It was not pity. It was closer to the mild irritation of a problem that had taken 5 seconds longer to solve than it should have. The day for Elias began not with an alarm, but with a small hand on his cheek. He opened his eyes to see his daughter, Maya, standing by his bed, her dark hair a tangled halo in the soft morning light. She was 6 years old, but her eyes held the steady, ancient calm of a much older soul. "The sun is awake," she whispered, as if sharing a profound secret. He smiled, the expression chasing the shadows from his face. "Then I suppose I have to be, too." He sat up, the worn floorboards cool beneath his feet. Their small apartment, situated above his woodworking shop, was filled with the scent of sawdust, coffee, and the faint, sweet smell of the lavender soap Maya used. It was a simple space, uncluttered and functional, but every object held a story. The bookshelf he had built from reclaimed barn wood, the small, wobbly stool she used to reach the sink, the framed drawing of a lopsided house she had made for him last year. He made them breakfast, his movements economical and practiced. Pancakes, her favorite. As he flipped them, she sat at the small kitchen table, a book open in front of her. She was not yet reading the words, but she studied the pictures with an intensity that was wholly her own. She was a quiet child, an observer. She saw the things that other people missed, the way a leaf curled as it dried, the pattern of cracks in the sidewalk, the fleeting sadness in a stranger's eyes. Elias watched her, a familiar ache of love and fear tightening in his chest. He was her whole world, and she was his. Her mother, Sarah, was a ghost in this house. A smiling photograph on the mantelpiece and a collection of stories he told Maya before she slept. The official story was a car accident. The truth was far more complicated. A wound tangled up in the life he had so deliberately abandoned. He had left that world of code and chaos to build this one. A world of clean lines, honest work, and the solid, grounding presence of his daughter. After breakfast, he walked her to the school bus stop at the end of their gravel driveway. He knelt to retie her shoe, his large, calloused hands gentle and precise. "Have a good day, little bird," he said, his voice soft. She wrapped her small arms around his neck, her cheek pressed against his. "You too, Papa. Don't let the splinters win." He chuckled, the sound low and warm. He stood and watched as the big yellow bus rumbled to a stop, its doors hissing open. Maya climbed aboard, found a seat by the window, and pressed her palm against the glass. He placed his own hand against the outside, a silent promise, until the bus pulled away. He stayed there for a long moment, watching until it disappeared around the bend, the dust settling in its wake. Only then did he turn back to his workshop, the quiet of the morning settling around him. On a high shelf, tucked behind a row of old paint cans, sat a single heavy textbook. Its title, Quantum Systems Architecture, was faded but still legible. He never looked at it, but he could never bring himself to throw it away. It was a relic from a different man, from a different life. Helena Croft stood before a wall of seamless glass, 20 stories above the city. The view was magnificent, a sprawling tapestry of concrete and steel that she commanded. But she was not looking at the view. Her attention was fixed on the holographic display that shimmered in the air before her, a complex, three-dimensional representation of a nervous system. This was the lattice, the proprietary global network that was the heart and soul of Croft Innovations. It was more than a network. It was a self-regulating digital ecosystem, the bedrock upon which her father had built this entire company. And it was dying. The hologram, usually a serene, pulsing blue, was now shot through with jagged lines of corrupted crimson. Data packets were vanishing. Core processes were entering functional dormancy. It was not a crash. It was a systemic, creeping paralysis, like a stroke spreading through a living brain. "Status," she commanded, her voice flat. Marcus Thorne, her chief technology officer, shifted his weight, the fabric of his $2,000 suit rustling uncomfortably. He was a man with an impeccable resume and the perpetual look of a student who had not done the reading. "We're seeing cascading failures across all subnetworks, Madam Chief Executive Officer. The diagnostic protocols are inconclusive. They are failing to even identify the source of the decay." Helena's eyes remained locked on the dying hologram. "Inconclusive?" she repeated, the word tasting like ash. She paid Marcus Thorne a salary that could fund a small nation, and his conclusion was that he had no conclusion. She saw the familiar quality of educated people encountering a problem that did not exist in their textbooks. A carefully masked panic, a retreat into jargon. "The system architecture is a black box," another engineer offered, his voice thin. "The original designer, he didn't believe in conventional documentation. He called it digital intuition. It's all integrated, symbiotic. We can't isolate any single component without risking a total collapse." Helena felt a cold knot of dread tighten in her stomach, an unfamiliar and unwelcome sensation. She had inherited this company, this legacy, upon her father's sudden death 5 years ago. She had not just maintained it. She had made it stronger, more ruthless, more profitable. Her entire identity was forged in the crucible of this control. To lose it, to fail where her father had succeeded, was unthinkable. The lattice was his masterpiece, his greatest achievement, and it was crumbling before her eyes. "Find the designer," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous pitch. "Find the man who built this." Marcus Thorne paled. "Madam Chief Executive Officer, that's difficult. He left the company almost 7 years ago, disappeared. There was an incident. All his files were sealed by your father personally. No one has heard from him since. Helena finally turned from the window, her gaze sweeping over the room of helpless experts. Her eyes were chips of ice. I am not interested in excuses, Marcus. I am interested in solutions. My father built an empire on this system. I will not be the one to watch it turn to dust because its architect is difficult to find. Unseal the files. Find him. Now she left the room. The silence she left in her wake more powerful than any shout. The fate of her world, she realized, now rested on finding a ghost. The search was a descent into a digital archaeological dig. Anya, Helena's quietly brilliant executive assistant, was the one who led the expedition. She bypassed the baffled CTO and went directly to the deep archives, a server farm entombed in a climate-controlled bunker 3 levels below the building. The files were locked behind layers of encryption that were themselves archaic, a digital fortress built by a paranoid and singular mind. It took her 36 hours of sustained, caffeine-fueled work to breach the first wall. What she found was not a personnel file in any recognizable sense. It was a collection of fragmented code, project notes written in a cryptic shorthand, and a single, redacted employment contract. The name on the contract was a pseudonym. Deadless, there was no photo, no address, no social security number. It was the file of a phantom. Anya, however, was persistent. She cross-referenced project access logs from 7 years ago. Searching for any digital breadcrumb left by this Deadless, she found one. A single, anomalous remote login to the system's core from an off-campus IP address, an address that was active for only a few minutes before being wiped. But the wipe had not been perfect. A ghost image of the router's registration data remained, buried in a corrupted log file. The name registered to the account was not Deadless. It was Elias Vance. She brought the name to Helena, presenting it on a tablet in the sterile silence of the CEO's office. The name meant nothing to Helena. It was just a string of letters. "Is this him?" she asked, her voice tight with impatience. "All evidence points to it," Anya confirmed. "He was a prodigy hired by your father straight out of university. He was the sole architect of the lattice. Then the data breach happened, the one that nearly bankrupted the company. The official record blames him. Negligence. He was fired, and he vanished." Helena stared at the name. Elias Vance. A ghost? A failure? A footnote in her company's history. Where is he now? Anya hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her usually composed features. That is the complicated part. He seems to have erased his professional existence. There are no credit cards, no digital footprint. But there is a business license, registered 3 years ago. For a sole proprietorship, she slid a new file onto the screen. Vance Custom Woodworking. The file contained a business address and a single, grainy photo from a public registry. It showed a man with tired eyes and a quiet, unyielding set to his jaw, standing in front of an old, faded blue Ford pickup truck. Helena went still. The blood drained from her face, leaving a stark, pale mask. It was him, the carpenter, the man from the parking lot, the insignificant obstacle whose truck she had ordered towed without a second thought. The architect of her salvation was the man she had dismissed like a piece of trash not 24 hours ago. The irony was so staggering, so profoundly absolute, that for a moment, she could not breathe. The man who held the keys to her kingdom was the one she had just casually, carelessly exiled from its gates. The past was a place Elias Vance rarely visited. It was a locked room in the architecture of his mind, the door sealed not with anger, but with a deep, weary sorrow. But now, with the name Croft echoing back into his life, the door was being forced open. He remembered the beginning, the dizzying ascent. He had been 22 years old, a kid who saw the world not in words or numbers, but in flowing systems of logic. Richard Croft, Helena's father, had found him. He had not seen a reckless youth. He had seen a fellow architect, one who built with code instead of steel. Richard gave him unlimited resources and a single monumental task: build a network that was not just a tool but a partner. a system that could anticipate, learn, and heal itself. Elias poured everything he was into the project. He called it the lattice, imagining a structure that was both infinitely complex and beautifully simple, a web of pure, self-aware information. He worked alongside Richard for 3 years, the two of them lost in a shared dream. Helena was a presence in the periphery then, a university student, sharp and driven, who would sometimes visit her father. Elias remembered her watching them, her expression a mixture of pride and a strange, almost resentful exclusion. She was her father's daughter, but the lattice was his father's son. Then came Julian, Helena's brother. He was the heir apparent, groomed for the business side, but he lacked his father's vision and his sister's ruthless intelligence. He saw the lattice not as a creation, but as a threat, a testament to Elias's bond with his father that he could never match. He saw Elias as a usurper. The betrayal, when it came, was quiet and devastatingly precise. Julian, using his high-level access, created a backdoor in the system, a flaw disguised as a minor recursive loop. He then sold that vulnerability to a corporate rival. The breach was catastrophic. Financial data, proprietary research, everything was stolen in the space of 6 hours. The company teetered on the brink of collapse. The investigation pointed directly to a module of code Elias had written. The backdoor was woven into his work so masterfully that it looked like his own catastrophic error. It was his signature, his style. Julian had studied him well. When Richard Croft confronted him, his face a mask of grief and disbelief, Elias saw Julian standing just behind him, his expression one of perfect, feigned concern. In that moment, Elias knew he could not win. It would be his word, the word of a nobody, against the son of the founder. To fight it would be to tear the Croft family and the company apart. But there was more. His wife, Sarah, was pregnant with Maya at the time. The stress of the investigation, the public humiliation, the long hours of interrogation, it triggered a complication. She went into premature labor. Maya was born tiny and fighting for her life in the NICU. Sarah developed an infection, and in the chaos of the corporate collapse and a newborn's fragile health, her condition worsened faster than anyone realized. She died 3 days later. Elias was shattered. He was left with a mountain of debt, a ruined name, and a tiny, premature daughter who needed him. Richard Croft, broken by the betrayal and the near ruin of his life's work, died of a massive heart attack less than a month later. Elias looked at the world he had helped build, the world of digital ghosts and unseen betrayals, and felt nothing but revulsion. He took his daughter, what little money he had, and he walked away. He erased himself. He learned to work with his hands, to build things that were solid and real, things he could touch. He built a life where the only system that mattered was the simple, unbreakable bond between a father and his child. He had sealed that door not just to protect himself, but to protect Maya from the ghosts that haunted its halls. Helena Croft did not send an emissary. This was not a task she could delegate. Humiliation was a currency she rarely dealt in, but she knew this payment had to be made in person. Anya found the address easily enough. A small, unassuming workshop in a part of town characterized by warehouses and the distant rumble of freight trains. It was a world away from the manicured lawns and silent glass of her corporate campus. She parked her black sedan, a car that cost more than the entire building in front of her, and stepped out. The air smelled of cut wood and damp earth. She could hear the rhythmic rasp of a hand plane from inside the open garage door. She smoothed the front of her jacket, a nervous gesture so alien to her, she barely recognized it in herself. She felt exposed, stripped of her authority. Here, she was not the CEO. She was just a woman asking for help from a man she had wronged. She stepped into the workshop. Elias was at a workbench, his back to her, shavings of pale pine curling onto the floor around his boots. The space was meticulously organized, tools hanging in their designated places, stacks of lumber sorted by type and size. It was a space of order and purpose. He was working on a small, intricately carved bird, its wings half unfurled. He stopped, sensing her presence, and turned slowly. His face was unreadable, a calm, quiet mask. He showed no surprise, no anger, no satisfaction at her reversal of fortune. He simply waited. "Mr. Vance," she began, the formal title sounding absurd in the rustic space. She faltered. The words she had rehearsed, the professional, detached appeal, died on her lips. They were meaningless here. "You found me," he said. It was not a question. His voice was low with a rough and used quality, like he spent most of his days in silence. "My company is in trouble," she said, forcing the words out. "The lattice is failing. No one understands it. No one but you." Elias picked up a piece of sandpaper and ran his thumb over its grit. He looked not at her, but at the half-finished bird in his other hand. "The lattice is not my concern anymore. That world is not my world. My father," she started, then stopped. What could she say about her father? That he had trusted him? That he had been destroyed by his apparent betrayal? He built his life on that system. "I can't let it fail." "Things fail," Elias said, his voice still quiet, but now edged with something hard, like bedrock beneath soft earth. "Things break. Sometimes they can't be fixed. You learn to build something new." He placed the wooden bird carefully on the bench. He looked at her then, his gaze direct and unwavering, and for the first time she saw past the carpenter. She saw the ghost in the machine, the architect, and in his eyes was the profound, unshakable weight of his loss. "I won't help you," he said, the words delivered not with malice, but with the simple finality of a closed door. "Please leave." Helena stood there for a long moment, the unaccustomed sting of refusal sharp and cold. She was used to buying solutions, to commanding results. But the man in front of her dealt in a currency she did not possess. She turned and walked out of the workshop, the scent of sawdust clinging to her expensive suit, the sound of the hand plane starting up again behind her, erasing her presence, erasing her plea. The next 2 days were a slow-motion catastrophe. The lattice's decay accelerated. Global financial markets, which relied on Croft Innovations' data integrity, began to panic. The company's stock plummeted. Helena barely slept, living in the command center, watching the crimson lines of corruption consume the hologram of her father's legacy. Marcus Thorne and his team were useless, offering only increasingly panicked theories. They were mechanics trying to fix a Rembrandt. On the 3rd day, desperate and out of options, she drove back to the workshop. She did not know what she would say. She had nothing left to offer. No threat, no amount of money would move him. She was coming to him with nothing but the sheer, unadorned weight of her failure. When she arrived, the large garage door was closed, but a smaller side door was ajar. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The workshop was empty. A child's small pink coat was hanging on a hook by the door. She heard a soft voice coming from the apartment upstairs. She followed the sound up a narrow, steep staircase. Elias was in the small living area, sitting on the floor. Opposite him sat a little girl with his dark hair and serious eyes. They were playing a game with wooden blocks. "Maya." Elias looked up as Helena reached the top of the stairs. His expression hardened. "I told you." Before he could finish, the little girl looked at Helena, her head tilted with a child's open curiosity. "Hello," she said, her voice clear and bright. Helena found herself unable to speak. She looked at the child, and then at the man on the floor, and the entire dynamic of her world shifted on its axis. This was his new system. This was what he had built in place of the one he had lost. Maya picked up the small wooden bird from the floor. It was finished now, sanded smooth, its details perfect. She held it out to Helena. "Papa made it. It's a sandpiper." Helena hesitantly knelt, her expensive trousers creasing on the dusty floor. She took the bird. It was warm from the child's hand, impossibly light and yet solid. The craftsmanship was breathtaking. She saw in it the same obsessive perfectionism, the same intuitive understanding of form and function that defined the lattice. "He's my hero," Maya said simply, looking at her father with an expression of pure, uncomplicated adoration. "He can fix anything." The child's words, so innocent and absolute, struck Helena with the force of a physical blow. A hero. She had the file on her tablet, the official story. A disgraced employee. A negligent engineer responsible for a catastrophic failure. A man who had broken her father's heart and company. She looked from the file in her mind to the father on the floor, and the two images refused to reconcile. Elias finally spoke, his voice strained. "Maya, this is a visitor. Why don't you go wash up for dinner?" The girl nodded, gave Helena a small, shy smile, and disappeared into another room. Elias rose to his feet. "You should not have come here. The system will collapse entirely within hours," Helena said, her voice barely a whisper. She was no longer a CEO making a demand. She was a daughter pleading for her father's legacy. "Everything will be lost." She held up the wooden bird. "The man who made this, he doesn't make mistakes. Not careless ones." She looked him in the eye. "I read the file. All of it. But sitting here seeing this, it doesn't add up. Tell me what really happened." Something in her tone, in her genuine confusion, broke through his defenses. He looked at the door where his daughter had gone, and a 7-year wall of silence began to crumble. He led her to the small kitchen table, and as the evening light slanted through the window, he began to speak. He told her everything. About Julian's jealousy, about the perfectly mimicked code, about the confrontation with her father. And he told her about Sarah, and about Maya's birth, and the real cost of the betrayal. As she listened, the cold, hard certainty that had defined Helena's life dissolved. The story of her past was a lie. The villain was not the quiet man in front of her, but her own brother. Her father had not died from the heartbreak of being betrayed by a trusted protege. He had died from the heartbreak of being betrayed by his own son, a truth he likely knew but could not bear to voice. When he finished, there was a long silence. Helena felt a profound, hollowing grief, not just for her father, but for this man and the life that had been stolen from him. "Come with me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not for the company, not for me. Come and show me the truth." He looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw a flicker of the brilliant, intense young man from the file. He gave a single, slow nod. The command center was a tomb of hushed panic when they arrived. The engineers and executives parted like the sea as Helena walked through, the quiet carpenter trailing in her wake. Marcus Thorne started to protest, but a single look from Helena silenced him. Elias walked to the central console, his work boots silent on the polished floor. He ignored the panicked faces and the dying hologram. He sat down, and for the first time in 7 years, placed his hands on a keyboard connected to the lattice. His fingers hovered for a moment, then began to move. He did not type commands. He had a conversation with the machine he had created. His fingers flew across the keys, lines of code scrolling past on the main screen at a speed no one could follow. He was not searching. He was remembering. He was feeling the familiar pathways, the digital synapses he knew as well as his own. Within minutes, he stopped. On the screen, isolated from the chaos, was a single, elegant strand of code. It was the backdoor, the flaw. "There," he said, his voice quiet but resonant in the silent room. He pointed to a string of characters embedded within the code, a digital watermark. "That's the encryption key for the access compiler. It's Julian's birthday. Year, month, day." The truth landed in the room with the force of a physical impact. Helena stared at the screen, at the simple, damning sequence of numbers. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place. It was her brother. It had always been her brother. Elias's hands moved again, not deleting the corrupt code, but isolating it, encasing it in a quarantine of his own design. He wrote a new patch, a simple, beautiful piece of work that flowed around the wound, healing it, reinforcing it. The jagged red lines in the hologram began to fade. The system's vital signs, displayed on a side monitor, began to tick back from critical to stable. The serene blue of a healthy system began to reassert itself. He had saved it. In less than 20 minutes, He had done what her entire team of experts could not do in a week. He stood up from the console and turned to Helena. He had not exposed Julian to the room, only to her. The proof was there on the screen, for her eyes only. What she did with that truth was her decision. His part was done. As he started to walk away, Helena spoke, her voice clear and strong. "Wait," he stopped but did not turn. "Thank you, Elias." He paused, then continued toward the door. As he reached it, Anya stepped forward, holding out a tablet. On the screen was a live video feed from a security camera in the building's lobby. Julian was there, surrounded by security, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. Helena had made her choice. Elias watched for a moment, then met Helena's gaze across the room. He saw not a CEO, but a woman grappling with a devastating new reality. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and then he was gone. The next day, he was in his workshop, the familiar rasp of the hand playing a comforting rhythm. A sleek black car pulled up outside. Helena Croft got out. She was not wearing a suit, but simple slacks and a sweater. She carried a small box. She walked into the workshop and placed the box on his workbench. "The board convened this morning," she said. "Julian has been removed. The authorities have been notified." She paused. "The file has been corrected. Your name has been cleared. There is a significant compensation package. An apology doesn't seem adequate." Elias looked at the box but did not open it. "I don't want your money, Helena." "I know," she said softly. From behind her, Maya appeared in the doorway, having slipped out of the house. She ran to her father's side. Helena knelt so she was at eye level with the child. "Your papa is a very brilliant man," she said, her voice gentle. "He built something amazing a long time ago." Maya looked from Helena to her father. "He builds amazing things all the time," she said, with the simple conviction of a true believer. A fragile smile touched Helena's lips. She looked at Elias, her expression open and vulnerable. The chasm between their worlds was still there, vast and deep, but a bridge had been built across it. It was a bridge built of a shared past, a painful truth, and the unwavering faith of a small child in her hero. The future was unwritten, a blank page. But for the first time in a very long time, it felt less like an ending and more like a beginning.